It's done? Oh man. Okay, good evening everyone. So tonight what we'll do is I will teach you a recipe.
Perfect.
Okay, let's start this side. If anyone is interested in what is it? Potato mushroom barley soup. I have a good recipe. I made supper tonight and my kids ate most of it. My wife was very impressed. She said that they never ate the soup as much as they ate tonight. Okay, it was that, and what else? It was barbecue chicken and potatoes in the oven. It was very good. But anyways, on a more serious note, just before I forget, November 17th, it's a Sunday. We're going to have a memorial in memory of Chacham Ovadia Yosef. It's going to be Tefillah as usual, Sunday 8:30. Following that, there's going to be breakfast sponsored by the synagogue. And following that, there's going to be a speech. And also the PTI, the yeshiva, will be here learning. We're going to have learning sessions. It's going to be 8:30 to around 11:15. Look into your Facebook or your emails. All the details will be sent this week. And it should be interesting. We want to have as many people as possible, so please make it a point to come. Take a few hours on your Sunday, and as well, spread the word. We'd like to have as many people as we can.
Kids invited?
Kids invited. Okay, so what I'd like to do tonight is, I'd like to speak about the concept of a bracha, a blessing. Try to develop this idea. As we know, in Judaism, we often bless. You come to the Knesset, and you ask for a blessing for someone who is not feeling well, or parnasah, whether it is Ashkenazi or Sephardi, but especially in Sephardic synagogues, especially when you come on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and the Shaliach Tzibur is saying Parnasah Tovah, you hear the whole congregation in unison, and the walls are shaking, Amen! Right? Because there's a big thing of bracha, of blessing. The question is, from where does it come? What is this concept? So, in this week's parasha, we find that Yitzchak gives a bracha to Yaakov. And he gives a bracha after to Esav as well. So, just to go back a step, as Yitzchak ages, he's blind, and Rivka, his wife, realizes, she overhears that he's going to give a bracha to Esav, his favorite son. Now, Rivka realizes that Esav should not get the bracha, but Yaakov should get the blessing. And therefore, she goes to Yaakov, her son, and she tells him, you have to listen to my commandment, I'm your mother, and I am asking you to go and to deceive your father in order to get the bracha, to deceive your father in order to get the bracha. And Yaakov listens to her, he goes, he is successful, he gets the blessing, and Yitzchak, Esav realizes that, as we know, Yitzchak realizes that, and then Esav is asking his father for another blessing. Yaakov in the beginning is a little bit reluctant to give him a blessing, and finally he does give him a certain bracha, a certain blessing. So we see that there is this concept of a bracha, a blessing that Yitzchak gave Yaakov and eventually Esav. Now there's questions about this, and you could look at your sheet. And the first question is, how do we understand the concept of interpersonal blessings according to Jewish tradition? What power does it have? When someone is giving a blessing for a refu'ah, or for parnasah, or for whatever it is, the Gemara actually says, Al tihi birkat hediot kala be'elech, that when a simpleton gives you a blessing, someone who's not a chacham, is just simple person, man or woman, Don't take it lightly. The blessing has power. Okay, so how do we understand it? Number two, are interpersonal blessings so magical that if they are recited in error, they are nonetheless effective? And we find it in this week's parasha where Yitzchak is supposed to give the bracha to Esav, but since he's blind, he thinks that it's Esav, but it's not Esav, it's Yaakov. Does the blessing still work? Yes or no? Is it magical? Is it hocus pocus? You say some words and boom, whoever is there gets the blessing, even though he was the person who was blessing was not intending to give the blessing to that person. Number three, how does God fit into the picture? What is Rivka so terribly frightened about? If Esav had been blessed by his father, couldn't God countermanded that blessing? So let's say Rivka is really keen for Yaakov to get the blessing. But why? I mean, let Esav get the blessing. Then Yitzchak will realize that really Esav shouldn't have gotten the blessing. And then maybe there's a way for Yitzchak to give the blessing to Yaakov. Number four, why the entire struggle for the blessing is necessary? Couldn't Isaac give two blessings? Because we see a certain struggle in the Torah. And it seems that Rivka is really, as we said before, keen. She wants Yaakov to get blessing because if he will not get it, it's going to be too late. And number five, how would Yitzchak have been so unaware as to believe that Esav and not Yaakov should be the heir of spiritual blessing, legacy of the family? That's another interesting question as well. After all, Yitzchak Avinu is someone who had a vision, and it seems that he made a mistake. So how do we understand that? So there are different approaches to all these questions. We'll start with to answer some of them. First of all, A, the power of interpersonal blessing is fundamental in Judaism. Where do we find it first? We find it by Avraham Avinu. Where HaKadosh Baruch Hu, before Avraham Avinu leaves his country in order to go to Eretz Canaan, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells him, Veheye beracha, and you will be a blessing. What does it mean, you will be a blessing? God said to Abraham, I blessed Adam and Noah. From this time and on, you will bless who you wish. This is what the Midrash says. Which means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave the first Ivri, Hebrew, Avraham Avinu, the ability to bless. So it's in the foundation of Judaism. Avraham represents the first Ivri, Hebrew. Avraham Goyim, the father of all nations, the father of our nation, is the one who gets this power from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, from God, who is telling him, Veheye beracha, you will be the blessing, you will bless. How do we understand this concept? Let's think for a minute about the creation of the world. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu, when God creates the world, He creates the world, how does He create it? With words. Vayomer Elokim. And God said. Which means that words are extremely powerful. HaKadosh Baruch Hu distinguished us, human beings, from all other creatures by giving us the power of speech. As it said in the Torah, in the creation of the world, Vayhi ha'adam le'nefesh haya. Adam became a living creature, soul. The Unkelos, which is the Aramaic translation of the Torah, says, le'nefesh memalena, to a speaking soul. Which means that the whole chiyut, the whole life of a person, is his speech. Without speech, there is no life in essence. So therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates the world. How does He create the world? With His mouth. And since we were created in the image of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of God, He is giving us, to Avraham Avinu, the same power, which is the power of speech. And as we know, the mouth is extremely powerful. How is it powerful? Whatever we say comes out of our mouth could impact other people for good, or God forbid, for less good. The Gemara in Masechet Brachot speaks about it. Gemara says, later on we'll see in Sefer Bereshit an interesting story. The Gemara proves a point from it. Gemara says in Masechet Berachot that it's better for a person to go to burn himself in a furnace than to embarrass someone in public. And how do we know it? The Gemara says we learn it from Tamar and Yehuda. Tamar, who was the daughter-in-law of Yehuda, she was married to the first son, and he died. Then the second son comes into the picture. He does Yibum, which is the first son of Yehuda dies without having children. Second son gets married with her. There's a mitzvah to get married with his sister-in-law in order to have children. He dies as well. So Yehuda realizes, something is wrong with this woman. I'm not going to give the third child. And then the Torah speaks about that Tamar realizes he's not going to give her the third son. So what does she do? The Torah says that she covers herself. She goes to another place, and Yehuda, she knows Yehuda will come there. Yehuda comes. He sees this woman, doesn't know that it's his daughter-in-law, and then he wants to live with her. So she tells him, okay, fine, but what are you going to give me? You're going to pay me something? Yeah, I'll pay you, but in the meantime, I will give you a collateral. Right? And what does he give her? Give her a chotemet, gives her a seal. She keeps it, and then, after Yehuda goes, 3 months later, Tamar is pregnant. Yehuda realizes that. He was the Av Bet Din at that time. And what is the din? What is the halacha in that case? What does he say? Hotzikuha v'tizaref. She has to get death penalty for that. She lived with, she made an immoral act. As she is going out,
doesn't weeping?
we'll come back to it. But the fact is, she goes out, and as she goes out, what does she say? She says, whoever, this chotemet, this seal belongs to, why doesn't she say, you are the father? Because she doesn't want to embarrass him. And then, what is it?
She gets him away.
Oh, way out. And then he says, it's me. But what do we learn from that? Mara learns from that she was ready to be nisraf, to burn, and not to embarrass Yehuda, her father-in-law, in public. How would she embarrass him? We don't know. So we see the power of the pig, to the point that Shlomo HaMelech says, "Achayim ve'hamavet," the lashon, life and death depends on the mouth. The person, the king, has the ability to say, "Mita, ayim," this one is going to live, this one is going to die, and so on and so forth. So coming back to Yitzchak, and the fact that he gives the bracha to Yaakov, in a sense, since God gave us this power of speech, of blessing, of bracha, if Yitzchak would have given the bracha to Esav, God would have been forced to accept this blessing, and he wouldn't be able to retract it later. It would be too late. Because whatever would come out of the mouth of Yitzchak would be, in a sense, sealed in the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the eyes of God. And Rivka realizes that. And that is why she is urging Yaakov, and she commands him, and she tells him, you have to go and do it. Even though you are going to lie to your father. Still, this is the right thing. Yes.
She had a reason. When she was pregnant, there was something happening to her while she was pregnant. So she went out and asked God what's happening and what happened. The young will take over and he will have the power of his brother. So she already knew ahead of time what's happening, and that's why she asked Jacob to do it.
Right.
But I'm wondering why God didn't go to Isaac and also tell him the same thing.
Why didn't God do
Yeah,
it?
he told the mother. What about the father?
Well,
So the mother didn't make a mistake
right,
because God already told the future.
right,
But the father didn't know.
right.
It was something like it could have an impact on the relationship.
Between the mother and the father.
Of course.
But the
And
father,
there was something there.
fine, but the father eventually realizes that he did something.
And
He knows, he sees that Rivka was right. There's no doubt, he realizes it.
well, after the case,
After the case, he realizes that. He realizes that.
when someone driving the car while he's drunk, boom! Oh, now I learned I'm not
True.
going to drink
True.
anymore. But it's too late.
But I would say that I think that Yitzchak Avinu was going through a test in a sense, and he learned something from it. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to challenge him with that to see what is going to be his decision. And through the decision he made, he realized what he did wrong, and then that, in a sense, made him into a better person, or he got more connected to God through this nisayon, the challenge that he had.
Man, yet he preferred Esau all his life, and in order there was something negative there.
Right.
Now, how we can accept that? How we can explain that?
Again,
I mean, for so many years, he took his son Esau as the perfect human or something like that. And for so many years, so what happened to it? Did this Tzaddik that he can see things and
but we see that Yitzchak Avinu is human as well, even though he's a tzaddik. The fact is, he made a mistake. That's what we started with. The whole idea is that Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and I believe in the first class we spoke about that, were not perfect. They made the mistakes as well.
Well, and if you look at the Chumash, what's really written about Yitzchak, it's not a lot.
No, there's not a lot written about him as well.
It's not like he did so much
Right.
to more.
As far as what's written, you're right. In the Chumash, at least, you're right. Just to continue on before going to point B, the idea of power of speech and action as well, we'll add that into the picture as well. In the Nefesh HaChaim of Chaim Volozhin, in the beginning of his book, I believe it's in the first chapter, he speaks about the power of action, when someone acts, when someone does something. And he says the following, going along with what we spoke about, the idea of we were created in the image of God. He says that since God is always creating, and he never stops creating, and we actually say it every day. Yotzer or uvore choshev. God doesn't say Yatzar in the past, created light, but Yotzer is constantly creating or uvore choshev, and is creating darkness as well. So the idea of light and darkness, he explains, is something that each one of us has as well. And how? By the choices that we make. By the way we speak as well. We could either, the same way that God has the ability to constantly bringing more light or darkness to the entire world, we as well as human beings, the actions that we do have an impact not just on ourselves or our families or our community, but the whole entire world. Either darkness or light, depending on the choice that we make as Jews and as human beings. Which is extremely powerful, which means that before we act, we have to think about it and know that this might impact the entire world. And that is the idea, coming back to speech. When someone is speaking, it's it's impactful either in a negative or a positive way, depending on what he is saying. B, there was a specific struggle between Yaakov and Esav about a particular blessing. What is it? The inheritance of the land. That's what the Ramban says. So this is a specific struggle that is taking place between Yaakov and Esav. And Rivka realizes that. Yitzchak does not realize that, but Rivka realizes that. What does she realize? She realizes that both nations can't get the blessing because the one who is going to get the blessing and the inheritance of the land is going to be always on top of the other nation. Is going to be the one who is going to rule the other nation. And Rivka realizes that. She had this bina yetera, this great wisdom that Yitzchak Avinu does not realize. Some say when the Torah speaks about the fact that he was blind, it doesn't mean necessarily only blind in a physical sense, but more of being able to see out of the box, which Rivka had that. She had this bina, this great wisdom that to understand that. And because of that, that is why she, again, encourages, pushes her son Yaakov to go and to get the bracha, because there is this constant struggle between Esav and Yaakov. As we know, Esav represents Malchut Edom, right? The Roman Empire, and Yaakov, Israel. And as we know, we see through history, there was always this struggle that when Jews were in other countries, they were under the rule of Esav. And why? Because that is being part of Galut, being in exile. But eventually, there's going to be a time, when the entire world will realize that God is one and His name is one. This will be the time that the bracha that Yitzchak gave to Yaakov will be fulfilled. And Rivka sees that. She has this vision. She's thinking about Aharit Yamim, about the end of the days. So, this is an interesting point, because this is what Sefer Bereshit is all about. The struggle that Yaakov has with Esav and that Yitzchak has with Ishmael is something that will accompany Am Yisrael through the generations. We find it by Ishmael as well, where the Ramban again says the following, something that is extremely frightening. The Ramban says, because when Ishmael gets the blessing, he gets a bracha as well. Yado bakol v'yad kol bo. His hand will be everywhere. What does it mean? The Ramban explains that there will be a time that the descendants of Ishmael, and we know who they are today, will rule upon the entire world for 9 months. This is what the Ramban claims. So I think that what we see today, what is happening in the world, is already, the Torah speaks about it, the Mfarshim, the Ramban, among others, speak about it, and this is something that if we delve into the entire Chumash, but especially Sefer Bereshit, we will find many things that are either happened to Am Yisrael, or are happening, or will happen to Am Yisrael, because the Gemara says also, Ma'aseh Avot, Siman Labanim. Whatever happened to our forefathers, to our matriarchs and our patriarchs, Siman Labanim is something that is going to accompany and is going to happen to us as Am Yisrael through the generations to come. And we see that it's happening. Okay.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Yes.
So you said the descendants of Ishmael will rule. Did you say 9 months? I didn't quite hear.
You got it, yes. The Ramban says that they will rule all over the world, on the entire world, for 9 months.
Okay, I thought that's what I heard.
You heard it correctly. 9 months, this is the Ramban's interpretation, where Ishmael gets a blessing. Because Ishmael got a blessing, Yadov Akol, his hand will be everywhere. His hand will be everywhere, by the way, it will be interpreted what we see today. You have certain Arab countries that their heads are everywhere. Mashallah, they have plenty, wherever they are. So this is a blessing that actually God gave Ishmael as a merit of being the son of Yitzchak. And why? Because there's an interesting midrash. The midrash says that when Sarah tells Abraham Avinu to chase away Hagar, kick her out of the house with Ishmael. So she is in the desert, there is no water. And the angels come to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to God, and tell him the following. They tell him, what should we do with Ishmael? He was a baby. What do you mean? What do you want to do with him? Should he die or should he stay alive? Why should he die? Because later on he's going to harm your children. Bnei Israel, Am Israel. And God says, is he Hayab or Zakai? Is he a tzaddik or rasha at this moment? Is he righteous or not? And they say he's not, he's a baby, he's innocent. Says if he's innocent, keep him alive. And not just that, the fact is as well, he's going to get a bracha, he's going to get a blessing, which is Yadov Akol, the idea of abundance, of getting whatever he wants to have wealth and so on, and so forth. So the whole idea of struggle happens already in the Torah between Ishmael and Yitzchak, Esav and Yaakov, and this is what the Jewish people went through either in Muslim countries or in Christian countries. All is based on what Sefer Bereshit is teaching us. C. Abraham originally wanted to give 2 blessings. That's another interesting approach. Because we started by saying in the class, in the beginning of the class we said, that actually there was 1 blessing. There are commentators who say actually he wanted to give, Yitzchak wanted to give 2 blessings. Which means that he wasn't wrong. Why? Which blessing did he want to give? He wanted to give to Esav the physical blessing, and to Yaakov the spiritual blessing. Why? Because he was a good parent after all. It says, in Shlomo HaMelech says, Hanoch lana'ar al pi darko. Every child, you have to educate him according to his way. Every child is in the neshama by himself or by herself. You can't educate Moshe and Aharon or Rivka and Esther the same way. Every child has his needs. And therefore, because of that, Yitzchak realizes that Esav is the one that is in the field. And therefore, the field, the idea of hunting and so on and so forth, he should get anything that is olam hazeh, this world. Yaakov, Ishtar, Yoshev, Ali. Yaakov is the one who is in the tent. He's the one who's opening the Chumash. He's learning. He's connecting to God. He has nothing to do with this world. Yaakov should get the ruhniyut, the spiritual blessing. Okay.
Don't grill me for what I'm going to say.
I don't know how barbecue.
But I've learned from a Hasidic rabbi that this parasha is the beginning of a minority complex that both sides have, the Israelites and the Edomites. Because if you see the physical world, where is the wealth of the world is based? In oil.
Yes.
So why Hashem put all the oil under the hands of the Arabs?
Okay.
If you see Israel, there's nothing there. It's just rocks. It's Arab coming out. Of course. So he says, this rabbi said, you can, as you say, right, my bracha belongs to me, your bracha belongs to you.
Yes.
The bracha of the Arab people is to be the providers of the world. And that's what Hashem said to Esau. You have to hunt, you have to toil, and then you're gonna get your fruits.
Uh-huh.
And if you have Arab friends, and if you go to their houses, they're hospitable. They will go out of their way to make you feel welcome, to make you feel comfortable. And if you go to their house, you will never leave unsatisfied.
Yes.
To the Jews, he gave us the bracha of learning Hashem's way and being a light for the world. But the problem is that a lot of Jews don't want this bracha. And if you see the way many Jews behave, me included, we don't want to be the light of the world. We want to be rich. We want to be Arabs. And the Arabs feel jealous that they don't have the other blessing. So if each one of them will fulfill the bracha that was given to them, then this world will work in a way that Hashem wants. He didn't want to condemn Isaac. He just gave him a different task. But they don't want that task. And we don't want our task. So,
Interesting. It's an interesting.
That's the only imperfectness in the world.
It's an interesting
that's
perspective.
what he says, with the wellness of the world. Imagine if you have all the oil of the world. You can provide for every life.
Right.
But you don't want that. You don't want to share with you.
Uh-huh.
And then the other ones don't want to share with you.
But the goal is that they should share with everyone.
They should complement each
They
other.
could come.
They should work and the other ones should be the light of the world. But do we do that?
No, definitely. And don't repeat this to the Jews in Hollywood. But anyways, but I understand. It's an interesting point. It's an interesting point.
In Israel, it was right for certain period.
Right.
All of the construction workers were Arabs,
Right.
Palestinians.
But the idea that Raj is trying to make is that since they got this bracha, so they should share the bracha with others, and vice versa with the Jews as well. Because we are, it's true, the Jews, we are considered the nation, the people of the book, right? So this the idea of giving wisdom to the world. Okay, interesting.
So, but you just mentioned earlier that there, if you're going to come to a house of another person, you won't get out insatisfied, or like there's no chance you're going to feel inconvenienced. Okay?
Which is true, by the way.
Yeah, okay.
There's achnasat orchim.
And then, the more the more sharing. Why are they out for sharing?
Okay. בסדר.
Why are they sharing? It comes to the other.
But anyways, coming back to what we were saying.
Where's
So,
the hospitality? Accommodating.
number 3.
Good topic.
Okay, so Abraham really wants to give 2 brachot, 2 blessings. However, Rivka realizes that it can't happen. It's impossible to give 2 blessings. Why? Because Yaakov can't be only staying in the tent learning. He has to be out there as well. And she realizes and she sees that it happens later on. Why? Because we see that Yaakov leaves Yitzchak and Rivka. Where does he go? He goes to his uncle Lavan. And more than 20 years later, when he leaves Lavan, how does he leave Lavan? He runs away from Lavan. Does he run away with no penny in his pocket?
Well,
With a lot of wealth. We're talking about Yaakov. He leaves with a lot of wealth. Why? Because Rivka realizes that Yaakov is going to get, contrary to what Roger said, Yaakov has to get both blessings. The physical and the spiritual as well. Both of it. Both of them. Why? Because Yaakov has to be someone who's going to take his spirituality and he's going to use it for this physical world. Okay? And I'd like to share with you what this formula says. And by the way, just before we continue, I'll go back one step. Speaking about the blessing that Yaakov got. When Yaakov got the blessing, the original blessing, we'll look at the Pesukim. I'll read the Pesukim for you. Here it is. The Pesukim that's talking about Yaakov, Yitzchak giving the brachot to Yaakov. It says, "V'yiten lecha Elokim," may God give you, "mital hashamayim mishmanei haaretz verov dagan v'tirosh." Talking about physical wealth, the dew of the heavens, mishmanei haaretz, the oils of the land. Ya'avducha amim v'yishtachavu lecha le'umim, may the nations serve you. You will be the one who is going to be Gevir le'achecha, the master over all your brothers, and so on and so forth. So, do you see any spirituality in what he's saying? Nothing. So, where is the spirituality? What is the spirituality that Yitzchak Avinu wanted to give Yaakov? It's actually later on. In Perek Chavchet, 28, chapter 28, where just before Yaakov leaves, it says, the Torah says, and I quote, "V'kel shaka yevarech otcha v'yafrecha v'yarbecha v'ayita lik'al amin v'yiten lecha et birkat Avraham lecha u'zaracha itach." The spiritual blessing actually takes place later. God will bless you, will multiply you, v'ayita lik'al amin, you will be numerous. You will give you the blessing of